Can I say, first of all, what a real privilege and pleasure it is for Sarah and me to be here this evening to celebrate an organization which started in 1994 and is now, through its actions against prejudice, discrimination, intolerance, and injustice, a British institution that makes me proud and I believe makes the whole people of Britain proud. And I'm pleased to be here with you this evening. We can look back on 20 years in which millions of young children, like my children, and young people growing up, have been educated to the values of tolerance as a result of Kick It Out. We can look back on 20 years in which, in 1999, during that period, Kick It Out in Britain helped create a European movement, Football Against Racism in Europe, and I'm pleased that they're running strong and with us this evening. 20 years in which you have remained steadfast to one immovable principle, that people will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That people will be judged not by the nature of their race, but by the width of their generosity, the depth of their humanity, and the breadth of their compassion. And that is the achievement of Kick It Out, and I congratulate all of you in what you've achieved. 20 years, as someone who has been in and then out of government during these 20 years is a long time to maintain the momentum of a campaign. I remember when I started off as a Member of Parliament, I put in my election address, I said, this constituency needs a Member of Parliament of youth and fresh ideas. And then 20 years later, when I was standing again at the election, I couldn't say that, could I? I said, this constituency needs a Member of Parliament of maturity and experience. But you know, over 20 years, you've managed to combine as Kick It Out the dynamism of staying young with fresh ideas, with the wisdom of maturity and experience, and that's what makes this campaign so successful and will continue to be successful. I have to admit, as a Scot, it's very difficult to come to Wembley. It's okay to come to a dinner. It's more difficult when we come to a football match. And my first memory of football, of an international, is 1961. And it is etched on my mind as a national humiliation. In 7 minutes, England had scored the first goal. By the time the match ended, it was 9-3 against Scotland. Frank Haffey was our goalkeeper that day, and I was listening to the match on the radio. And such was the national humiliation that poor Frank Haffey had to emigrate, and he had to go to Australia to get away from the humiliation in Scotland. And Dennis Law, I think it was, in 1990, 30 years later, arrived in Australia and met Frank Haffey. And Frank's first words to him, is it safe to come back? And the answer was no. 20 years, at the end of which, as we've just heard from that brilliant and eloquent speech that started this proceedings, there is still much work to be done. 20 years at the end of it, we saw 2 years ago in Serbia, Danny Rose and England footballers being subjected to racist taunts, and yet the team and the country for which that was in were barely penalized by the European authorities, and indeed were allowed to continue in the tournament without playing their matches behind closed doors, but still in the tournament. 20 years at the end of which, only a few weeks ago, Dani Alves in Barcelona, attacked by a racist supporter, bananas thrown at him, and although he acted with huge dignity, and indeed Neymar went on with this jibe that they were just a bunch of racists, which I thought was very good, we still have to root out racism from European football. And 20 years at the end of it, we found only a few weeks ago Jeremy Clarkson giving racist slurs on BBC and still holding on to his job, while at the same time Lenny Henry attacked by someone and told that he should leave the country. I tell you, who stands up for British values best? It is Lenny Henry rather than Jeremy Clarkson in this episode. And 20 years at the end of it, I'm sad to record that we have had some great black managers, Chris Hughton, Chris Powell, Keith Alexander. It is about time we had more black managers in British football today. In 1959, Richard Nixon, who was still Vice President then of the United States of America, He went to Ghana for the independence celebrations. And Richard Nixon, as you may remember, was a rather gauche man, didn't quite know what to do in the circumstances in which he found himself. So there he was at the celebrations in Ghana, meeting all the native Ghanaians and trying to talk to them. So he went into the crowd and he said to the first person, rather stupidly, "How does it feel to be free?" And then he met the next person and he said, "How does it feel to be free?" And then he met a third person and he was put in his place. "How does it feel to be free?" he said. And the man said, "How should I know? I come from Alabama in America." 1959, and before the father of the speaker, we have this here this evening, and I am so pleased to welcome Martin Luther King Jr. to be with us this evening. And we know that the battle for civil, social, economic, and political rights has to go on. I want to tell you two short stories about two footballers. The first is a boy called David. Rwanda, 20 years ago, just as Kick It Out was being formed. Rwanda undergoing a civil war. And if you go to Rwanda today, there is a museum, a memory of that terrible racist fight that broke out in Rwanda causing genocide. And you'll see a photograph of a young boy who was a young footballer in Rwanda at the time. And they have his photograph, and then they have a few pieces of information. And it says, David, age 12, favorite sport, football, favorite pastime, making people laugh, ambition to be a doctor, death by mutilation. Last words to his mother, the United Nations are coming to save us. And we never did. And in his innocence and in his idealism, that young boy, that young footballer, believed that when there were crimes against humanity, racist crimes against humanity, we would come to help them. But there is hope. I tell you one other story. 1914, a young man called Walter Tull, and many of you will have heard about him, and many of you may have signed the petition so that he be remembered. Born in 1888, 1897, at the age of 9, made an orphan. His brother taken away and moved to another place. Him in an orphanage. All he could do was clean floors and clean people's shoes. And then they discovered he had a talent for football. And he played for Clacton and then Tottenham and then Northampton and was about to sign for Rangers. Unfortunately moved on, partly because of racial discrimination among supporters of that day. But when the First World War broke out in 1914, that young man signed up immediately. The Middlesex Regiment, the footballers' regiment, served in the Somme at Passchendaele, then in Italy, and then back to the Somme, mentioned in dispatches for his bravery, unfortunately dying before the war ended in the last battle of the Somme. Never awarded the Military Cross, although he should have had it. But that young man thought nothing of saying that he was going to fight for his country. And that young man could have said, I'm out for myself. I've got to protect my own. But instead, he gave his life for his country. And we must remember young men like Walter Tull, who in his own lifetime was not given the rewards he deserves, but now should be remembered for his great contribution, not just to football, but his great contribution to our country serving us in the time of war. If we think of the future, let us think of Nelson Mandela and the legacy he left behind. I was fortunate to know Nelson Mandela in the years after he came out of prison. I was at a dinner in London only a few years ago when we celebrated his 90th birthday, and some of you may remember that great occasion when he came to London to raise funds for his charity on his 90th birthday. And Oprah Winfrey was there, and Elton John was there. And Nelson Mandela gave a portrait that had been prepared of a letter that he'd done to a school child and auctioned it for the charity. 900,000 Oprah Winfrey, 950,000 Elton John, 975,000 Oprah, $1 million Elton John, and then Oprah Winfrey won it at 1.1 million. And then she was told it was in pounds and not dollars. And I said to Mandela, I said, you should just give Elton John a letter and charge $1 million, and we make another $1 million for the charity. And then we went on, and there was a concert for Mandela, and in Hyde Park. And Mandela was fascinated by the young singers that he then went and met. And he went down to meet the late Amy Winehouse. And he was talking to her, fascinated by her voice and also by her great talent. And Amy said to Mandela, you know, my husband and you've both got a great deal in common. Both of you have spent a lot of time in prison. And Mandela sent out a message on that night that I want to repeat to you today. You know, in his prison cell in South Africa on Robben Island, he had the facsimile of a painting that is now in the Victoria and Albert Museum. And it's a painting done by a British author, and it's of a young girl, blinded, trying to play a harp with broken strings, sitting on a globe of the world. And the painting is entitled Hope. It is the basis of Barack Obama's book, Audacity of Hope. And the message was that even when things seem hopeless, there is always hope. And I believe we can look forward with hope, because what I see in young people today is a determination to stand up to racism, prejudice, discrimination, and injustice wherever they find it. Hope is more than wishful thinking that good things might be done. Hope is more than optimism that good things can be done. Hope is more than great expectations that things could be done. Hope is in reality a demand that things that are right must be done and will be done. Let us use the next few years to fight racism wherever we see it, to fight intolerance in every part of the world, and to fight for the justice that everyone here, and I congratulate you, has stood up for 20 years. My congratulations to kick it out.